Well, hi, everybody, and welcome again to another episode of 100 Yards of Football, the platform that brings you Take 5 with Steven Travers. And Steve is with us today. Our producer is Logan Landers. Thank you so much for Logan's work. We say in advance, Steven, for obvious reasons. Logan is one of the hardest working people in podcasting, trying to keep up with us and our banter that we go back and forth. But here we are getting in the latter part of spring. Now, here in Atlanta, it's been raining about the past 5 or 6 days. I know out in sunny California, it's a little bit different, but Mark Twain once said the coldest winter I ever spent was a summer in San Francisco. So you're getting ready for the summer freeze to kick in, so to speak. But Steven, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much, Harper. And it's, the baseball season is really kicking in. This is the time of year when it really starts to happen and you start to really pay attention to the statistics of players, which brings me to a memory. This is May. It was May of 2001 when certain things happened. It actually happened in where you are, Atlanta, Georgia, that played a big role in my life and in my career. So I think that's something we might be talking about today.
Well, yeah, let's discuss that. Steven, you've authored over 30 books, and today we're going to talk about one that, in my opinion, captures one of the most polarizing athletes of the 20th and maybe even the 21st century because he carries over 22 years in the big leagues and one of the most controversial figures that you'll ever come across. His greatness on one side and then the controversy on the other side really separates a lot of people. The more homework that I did, the more I realized, well, wait a second, that wasn't so bad. And then there's some other things. Well, maybe that was, you know what I mean? So we're going to balance that act a little bit today. Your book is called Barry Bonds, Baseball's Superman. Tell us a little bit about the background that got you interested in writing about Barry. We're going to talk a lot about how that evolved into a book, the conversations, the interviewing, the whole process itself. But what you mentioned, the Atlanta situation. Go ahead and bring up just some of the background that will take us into the rest of this interview here.
Right. Well, a few weeks back we had Bruce McGowan on the show, and my involvement with Barry Bonds and his involvement with Barry Bonds was discussed a little bit at that time. And he actually plays a big role in this book that I wrote, which is on the screen right now. But what we're talking about here, for me personally, and in my career, Branch Rickey used to say, luck is the residue of design, or you could say it any way you want to say it, hard work meets preparation. Well, I had started off as a screenwriter and I had struggled and I had a little bit of success, made a little bit of money. And then I'd had two good jobs that actually paid good money. One was with a magazine in Los Angeles. And then I had come to the San Francisco Examiner. And this is in 2001. And they had an editor named Dave Bergen who liked me and hired me and kind of recruited me to come up from Los Angeles back to my hometown of San Francisco. And so I find myself in the spring of 2001 with the Examiner, and I have an entree to the entire world of sports in the San Francisco Bay Area, which at that time was really going. The Giants were very strong. The Oakland A's were in the middle of the Moneyball era. The Oakland Raiders were pretty good. In fact, they were very good. The 49ers were a playoff team. And so it was a great job and a great opportunity. So what happens is I find myself at Pacific Bell Park in San Francisco as a columnist with the Examiner. This is the old Hearst Examiner, one of the great newspapers of America. Wow. Yeah. It's kind of at the end of its road. This was sort of the beginning of the end of newspapers, but we still had some life left. And so I'm writing for them. Okay. Early on in the season, this is maybe the first series of the year or the first home series. The Giants play the Dodgers and Barry Bonds hits his 500th career home run. And it's a walk-off. So I write an article for the Examiner, and it was kind of a historical look at, because the fans in San Francisco really responded to Bonds when he hit that homer, and he had struggled with the fans over the previous years. There had been an article in SI with just lambasted him and said, my name is Barry Bonds and you're not. I'm Barry Bonds and you're not, you know. And so this was how a lot of people viewed him. But I started thinking, I'm starting to see a change in the way the fans are reacting to him. And he's 37, and maybe Barry is maturing a little bit. So I read a very nice piece about Bonds, and I compare it to when Ted Williams returned from Korea, when Mickey Mantle went after Babe Ruth's record, and his godfather, Willie Mays, who had struggled to gain popularity with the fans in San Francisco and finally did in 62.
And Steven,
yeah.
Real quick, Barry wasn't just a newcomer from the Pirates. He had been there for what, 7, 8, 9 years at that time, right?
Oh, very much so. He was a Bay Area, he was born in the Bay Area. His father was Barry Bonds. He had grown up at Candlestick Park. In that respect, he should have been absent, but he was Barry Bonds. And, you know, that was, you know, the things they say about the thing about Bonds, and I'll get into this later, but you know, everything they say about Bonds is true, but it's also tempered by another side. And we'll get into that later. But right now, I wrote this article, and Bonds had an assistant who was always at the ballpark. His name was Steve Hoskins. He was like his best friend from high school. I don't think he'd gone to Sarah with Barry, but I think he'd grown up with him through the 8th grade and gone to the public school. But anyway, he says, Barry liked your article. And I'm like, really? And I said, can I get an interview with Barry? He goes, he brings me over. And Bonds had a cubicle at Pac Bell Park. He had 2 cubicles, and it was covered, there was a huge stanchion in front. So Bonds was behind the stanchion, and nobody, unless you were just like, you know, crawling into it, you couldn't see what was happening back there. He had a big TV, which was attached to the ceiling, which only he could see. And he had an entourage of people, none of whom were Giants employees, who were in there with him. One was Hoskins, and the other guy was this guy Anderson, who later did jail time. He was Barry's guy with Balco. He would, all the stuff that he would get from Balco, he would get and bring it to Barry at the ballpark or wherever. And these were the people who were there. And I find myself with Barry Bonds face to face. Now I get introduced to him, and Barry basically looks at me like I'm Patrick Swayze in Ghost. You can't see me. I'm non-existent. I'm invisible. And then I finally come up with a nice little intro, and I say, Barry, I'm friends with Charles Scott. And he looks, oh, really? You know, Charles Scott was a good friend of mine, was Barry's roommate and best friend at Arizona State, an All-American, played 9 years in the pros, and was, and to this day is maybe Barry's best friend.
Okay.
So this was a tremendous in for me, because now that I knew Charles Scott, he now figured that I was worthy of asking him questions. So he conducts an interview with me. Okay, so the season begins, and I am interviewing Barry on a regular basis. And Bruce McGowan comes to me and he says, these other guys want to know what your secret is, you know, because Bruce Jenkins and Scott Osler and Schulman, who was the beat writer, and Ron Bergman of the San Jose Mercury News, and these guys, Barry Bonds does not give them the time of day.
Right.
And they're asking Bruce, who they know, they don't really know me, why is Barry Bonds talking to this dude? And I say to Bruce, well, there's a couple of reasons. One is I know Charles Scott, and two, I don't know, I played a little pro baseball. Maybe that counts for something. But mainly, I have previously been in LA, and I have never written anything bad about Barry. I don't have any baggage with him. And I basically said, eventually I'll write something he doesn't like, and that will be the end of that. But everything's going well. So now we get to mid to late May, and the Braves or the Giants are in Atlanta, and it's hot in Atlanta, and the ball carries there. This is the old stadium. I think this is Turner Field, I believe.
Fulton County is the old one. Yeah.
I think it was in between.
Oh, they're in Turner. Yeah.
It was Turner Field, and then they bought a new one some years back. And Bonds, I don't have it in front of me. It's a 3 or 4 game series, and Bonds hit something like 8 homers, drives in something like 20 runs, bats about 800. It's maybe the best series that I am aware of any Major League Baseball player ever having offensively. He absolutely, and we're approaching late May. Bonds is something like 31 home runs.
And these are some good Braves teams, right? This is
very good Braves. This is still Maddox, Glavine, Smoltz. He's just connecting. Doesn't matter. I mean, if you look at YouTube of Bonds during that season, it didn't matter what they threw. They could throw him a curveball, screwball. They could throw it, and he wouldn't if he wouldn't swing at anything that was an eyelash of a fly off of the plate. And the umpires gave it to him because he had a better eye than they did. And he just owned home plate, and he just owned offense. And his team was just kicking butt because nobody wanted to walk anybody for 4 batters leading up to him. And then Bonds either clearing the bases or hitting a double, and he's on second. So there's 2 or 3 guys on base. So this guy's hitting behind him are all cleaning up. And he's just making the whole. I've never seen anybody do this. I've seen Mays. I've seen, A-Rod. I've seen all the great ones. I've never seen a baseball player or really any athlete dominate a sport like this. I mean, I would say Wayne Gretzky in hockey, Babe Ruth, Mark Spitz, and the other fellow broke Spitz's record in swimming. It's a short list. Anyway, they come back. And I go up to Hoskins, actually, and I say, I got an idea. Bonds is going to break the all-time Major League record for home runs, which was set by Mark McGwire, only 3 years earlier. He's going to break that record. And we talked to Barry, and I said, Barry, you're going to break the record. And he goes, yeah, I know. He doesn't say, yeah, maybe. If I get hot, he goes, yeah, I know.
My goal is, or I'm really looking forward to the challenge. No, it's, I'm going to break it. Yeah.
He just knows. I mean, and I say, look I want to write a book about you, about this season and about your life. And it's going to be a gold mine. I can get a lot of money and it'll be a big bestseller. And this is his quote. He goes, definitely, Well, actually, first there was some period where Hoskins calls me, and he says Bonds wants to do it. So I'm like, God, this is really great, So I say, okay, we need to hammer out the specifics. He says, okay, meet Barry tomorrow at about 10:30 at my art studio. Hoskins was an artist. He did charcoal sketches of athletes, and he was actually a very good artist. Barry, Willie Mays, Willie McCovey, Joe Montana, that type of thing. And he had a studio in San Carlos. It was probably all paid for by Barry. I don't know, but he was meet me at the studio. So I'm there 10:30, 11 the next day. Knock on the door. There's no answer. I go to the Starbucks across the way. I get a cup of coffee. I make a couple phone calls, not getting any answer. I go back, knock on the door, no answer. I've been stood up. So I'm going, well, this is not a good start. But the Giants had a game that night. So, I go get some lunch. I got to drive back to Pac Bell Park. St. Carlos is sort of in the middle of the peninsula, not far from Stanford, sort of halfway between San Francisco and San Jose, 25 minutes from Pac Bell Park. Drive back there, get there early, and Bonds is always there early. Big work ethic. He'd lift weights, and he had a whole diet thing that he would go through. He had a dietitian, and he would do this whole stretching thing, and he would work on specifics in the batting cage. Just watching him in his pregame preparation was just an artist at work. The preparation of a great athlete who truly, Bonds combined natural ability with work ethic and intelligence and baseball instinct, like a savant for the game. Like A-Rod had that. Willie Mays had that. Some people have that. The Montana, Brady in football, Michael Jordan, the great ones. They combine all of these factors, and that's why they're so much better. Anyway, I see Barry, and he could not be more apologetic. It's like, dude, I'm so sorry. You wouldn't believe what happened. And he tells me that morning he went to enroll his daughter. I think it was his youngest child in preschool or kindergarten or something like that at some local school. He gets there, he tells me, and they say, oh, no, Mr. Bonds, you have to do it by the internet. You can't just show up and enroll your kid. You have to do it by the internet. Even then, everything was on the internet. And so he goes back, and, this is 2001. The internet is kind of flaky in those days. Everything's on a dial-up, and he's struggling with it. So he struggles for a couple hours to get his daughter onto this, enrolled in this school. And by the time this has happened, he's missed out on his appointment with me. But now he's apologizing to me. My heart goes out to the man, because I'm a father and I see a fellow father. I don't see a superstar. I see a guy dealing with everyday things with his daughter, and so I think I like him more. So anyway, we are talking about the book, and we're going to do the book. And I say, okay, now what I really need to do is I need to get a publisher. And as far as interviewing for the book, I'm getting everything, because I'm talking to them, whenever they're in town, and I'm at most of the games. And so I'm getting a lot of this stuff that I'm going to need for the book, but we have to get a publisher. I call up a friend of mine in PR down in LA, Mark Sampson, I think was, nice guy. And he says, I got a guy for you. He puts me in touch with a guy named Mel Berger of, or maybe it was Berger of William Morris in New York City. I said, that's great. Big time publishing house. I contact him. He says, oh yeah, that sounds like a project. So over the next month, he's trying to sell the book to the New York Publishing Agency. In the meantime, I'm continuing to interview Bonds, and I'm writing about him in the Examiner and doing my job. And I'm at the games, and I'm like a guy who's with George Patton going towards Berlin at the end of 1945. I'm seeing history right in front of me. I'm talking to history every day. It's an unbelievable opportunity for a writer, and for someone who struggled like me. All of a sudden, it's just gold. Well, about a month passes, and now it's around the All-Star game. It's July, and I finally get back with Bergen and Mel Berger. Nobody in the New York publishing world wants to work with Barry Bonds, he says. Really? And I say, I already have the research. I've been talking to him. And he goes, yeah. He goes, they don't want to deal with him. Bonds had already mentioned $2 million. And I knew we weren't going to get $2 million, but I'm kind of thinking if we can get 800,000, maybe Barry will be happy with that. I'm going to have to split it with him, or I'll probably get 35% of it. I probably won't get 50, but it'll still be a good payday. But Berger says, no, they don't want to deal with Bonds. He has a bad reputation. The main problem, I think, was they felt that Bonds would not participate in the marketing of the book or the book tour once the book came out. And so another thing that is happening at this time is I've been approached by Playboy magazine, and they've heard that I'm writing a book about Barry Bonds, and they want me to do the Barry Bonds interview. The fact is, I probably could have submitted that interview just based upon what I had talked to Barry about just in conversation over the previous 2 months. But I make the mistake of before approaching him on that, of saying to Barry, I'm sorry, but Mel Berger of William Morris says that no one wants to work with you. Now I get the cold stare and I get the other Barry Bonds. And now I am a person who does not have anything to offer Barry Bonds, and I'm like, well, we could still do it with another publisher, a smaller publisher for less money, or even if we do it for no money up front, I'm sure the book will sell. We'll probably make more money on the back. He doesn't want to hear that. This is, and we've all heard this, Harper, what do athletes say? Pay me my money. And we always hear this term, pay me my money. I mean, it's the world, if you're a pro athlete, I'm not saying this about you, Harper, because I don't think you were like this, but so many of these guys, pay me my money. I want to get paid. We hear this over and over. It's one of the big reasons that fans are turned off by athletes. And this is the language that Bonds is using. And, he wants an upfront fee, and he'd mentioned $2 million. And I thought maybe 800,000 would do it, but we don't even get to that point. So the rest of the season plays out, and I no longer have the relationship with Bonds. I'm no longer part of the inner circle. And this is about the point where I'm, sitting with Bruce McGowan and Marty Lurie, and we're telling these stories that we talked about on the show about a month or so ago. And, half of it is, tell us what was going on with Bonds. I mean, they all want to know what's happening with that. Well, he's just, there's a nice Barry and there's a not so nice. There's a Dr. and a Jekyll and a Mr. Hyde. Well, anyway, to cut it short a little bit, the season plays out and Barry breaks the home run record, and I'm there to cover it. And I already had, now I go to Tim Tessalone, my friend who ran sports information at USC. Said, Tim, I tell him the story. Do you know any like mid-level publishers who might take on a story about Barry Bonds from a guy who's seen it firsthand, sitting in the stadiums, in the clubhouse? I've been there. It's happening right now. Yeah, I think so. He puts me in touch with a company out of Champaign-Urbana. I think it was associated with the University of Illinois. It was close to it. Anyway, it was called Sports Publishing LLC. It was a good house in those days. It's not around anymore. But I'd seen a lot of their books. They had a lot of popular books in the 90s. In fact, they had even done a book on McGwire after he broke the home run record 3 years earlier. And they say, yes, absolutely. We will do it. We will absolutely. There's Tim. And so they sign me up, and they give me a little upfront money, not an awful lot, but most of it's on the back end. And so Bonds has broken the record. Now I'm writing the book, and I come up with the book. At some point while I'm writing it, I get a phone call from a guy named Skip Bayless, and I'm sure you know who he is. For years, he was he was a regular on ESPN. I think was he on with Michael Irvin? He was a regular. He had, at the time, he was with the San Jose Mercury News. He'd previously been with the Dallas Times Herald, or one of those papers. Anyway, and he calls me up and he says, you got to get to the bottom of Bonds on steroids. This is the fall of 2001. And I'm like, well, Skip, I've seen him in the locker. He looks like a guy on steroids, and his head is big. And there's a lot of people talking about this, but I'm like, how am I going to, what am I going to do? How am I going to get to the bottom of it? Bonds isn't going to tell me. None of his people in that inner circle hung with him in the clubhouse. They're not going to say anything. I don't think his teammates are going to say anything. So I'm not really in a position to do that. So I write the book, and it's not about steroids, but it's about Barry and my experiences with him, the amazing season that he had. His 9/11 occurs. At this point, I'm thinking, boy, is this really going to hurt the book? Are people going to care? But as it turns out, sports played a big role in America rebounding from 9/11. You had bonds, you had some big games in New York, you had the World Series. And so that kind of plays into the story and enhances the story. I write the book. The book comes out in around spring training 2002, and it gets Bonds is off to a fantastic start. Opening day, it's a homer to win it, makes a catch, save the game. He's off to a great start. The team's off to a great start. Everything is perfect, and the book sales are shooting off the roof, and I'm becoming a famous person. I'm on all the radio stations in Los Angeles, in San Francisco. I'm on WFAN in New York. I'm on the Jim Rome Show. I'm on CNN. I'm on national television. I'm on ESPN. Pretty much every sort of outlet. USA Today, the New York Times, San Francisco Chronicle, they all write good reviews. The book is received generally well. And I know that there's going to be a nice payday down the line. So the book is doing great. And I'm doing a book tour in Los Angeles and in Sacramento and in the San Francisco Bay Area. And everything's going great. So finally, we get to August of 2002. And this is weird because the baseball players at that time were threatening to go on strike. And the impact on my life of 3 baseball strikes was really quite horrendous. In 1981, I had lost probably $12,000 to $15,000 from the Boston Red Sox when the baseball players went on strike just before the draft, and I ended up signing for almost nothing with the Cardinals. In 1994, and I've told this story before, a sports agency that I worked for went out of business because the baseball players went on strike, although that actually turned out to be a blessing in disguise, because that's really how I became a writer. Now I'm a writer and I'm doing well. So, but at the time it was, and so here I am again, and the baseball players are threatening to go on strike. And my publisher is going to do a paperback edition because we've sold so well that we're going to go into paperback. And they say, well, let's wait until we see whether the players go on strike. So this is all through July and into August as we're waiting to see whether these players go on strike. Meanwhile, the sales, the book, the hardcover gets sold out. They don't do the paperback, and I'm losing sales. I'm like, man, come on. Are you kidding? Finally, they decide not to go on strike. By the time the paperback comes out, we've lost a lot of sales in the last month of the season. Luckily, it came out in time for the playoffs and the World Series, and the Giants that year made it to the playoffs and to the World Series, and that helped the sales. So the book did very, very well, and it really launched me as a writer. And then after that, Pete Carroll came on at USC, and I started writing these USC books, as you know, and those did very well. But that all started first because I had written the Bonds book. And then briefly, this story about the steroids from my perspective, as Skip Bayless had said, you got to get to the bottom of it. In 2004, I got a phone call from a guy who says he's a literary agent in New York, and he says the publishing industry wants to place a writer on what he called the big steroid book, and I think you're just the guy to do it. How much money can we make? Oh, we can make hundreds of thousands of dollars, just on up front. And so this is great. Yeah. So I work with this guy and we do a whole story on, my association with bonds, what has happened. And then getting back to that, what had happened, all of a sudden the guy ghosts me, the literary agent. He drops off the face of the earth. I don't hear back from him. What the heck is going on here? These are the weird stories of Steve Travers' career. And then shortly thereafter, I hear Mark Fenner-Iwata and Lance Johnson of the San Francisco Chronicle have signed on to do a book detailing the steroids in sports, mainly on Barry Bonds and Jeremy Giambi and Olympic athletes, Jason Giambi and Olympic athletes. It's going to be published by whatever publishing house. And so that's obviously where the big steroid book went. Oddly enough, Fenner-Iwata was a guy who'd gone to my high school, and he had actually helped me with my Bonds book. I would call the Chronicle. And he would get information from me, for me, that the Chronicle had that they might have in their old storage bins. This is before everything's digitalized, and so he became a friend. But now he's the guy, and the reason he got that is because he and Lance Johnson were with the Chronicle and they covered the city beat, and Bonds ends up going on trial in the Balco trial. This is 2003. This is 2 years after I know him in 2001 when he sets the record. And they had access to everything that came out in that trial. That was all comes out through discovery. I didn't have access to discovery because I'm just a writer. They have everything that the FBI has. And the FBI had a guy named Jeff Nowitzki. And in 2002, Nowitzki he lived near Balco. And he was with the FBI, and he says, "Hey, I've got a great idea for the next big FBI case." And he goes to Balco and he literally rummages through their garbage can. And then he has the power of indictment to walk into their offices and find their paperwork, none of which I had the ability to do. So the only reason we find this out is because the FBI had gone in and they'd found out everything that Balco was doing, the clear, their association with Alex Rodriguez, with Marion Jones, so many athletes, Jason Giambi, and all these different people. And now it comes out under the reporting of Mark Fenner-Iwata and Lance Johnson, and that's why they get the big steroid book. And every time I see Mark, and who's going to be on our show, by the way, in a few weeks, in a month or so, lives near me. I see him all the time. He's a great guy. I don't begrudge him at all the work that he did. And later he did some great work uncovering the role of concussions in pro football. And he wrote a book about that, and he was on a PBS documentary and did a lot of stuff with ESPN for that. So he's a very strong guy in the terms of sports investigative journalism. But anyway, that was the reason that my book didn't have the steroids. But I did mention in the book that, in my opinion, he was the greatest player ever. He retired in 2007 with records that we know about, breaking Aaron's record and a number of other records that, in my opinion, I think make him the greatest baseball player of all time, at least statistically. And you could argue that, but that was my experience with Barry Bonds. Now, everything else you can ask questions about Barry, his career, my opinion on it, but those are the essential facts from me personally knowing him and how it affected the book that I wrote about him, and then what my tangential involvement or lack of involvement, I suppose, with the whole steroid case, because I didn't have anything to do with it, but I had insight into it. So it was an amazing time in my life. And again, it was luck meeting preparation and meeting luck, or luck meeting preparation. I was prepared for this opportunity, and all of a sudden it fell into my lap after a lot of struggle. And so I'm very grateful for it.
Were there times during the process, in terms of just writing the book, that you go, okay, how far back do I go? Do I want to go to his bringing up, being born in Riverside, his high school, Arizona State? What were the limitations that you were going to kind of place around it? Or was it just that you wanted to focus specifically on this 2001 season?
Oh, no. It was a biography of Barry Bonds from it covered Bobby Bonds, who grew up in Riverside and faced racism when he got into the big leagues. Had Barry in 1964, when he was probably 20 years old, still a minor league player, comes to the majors, gets to know Willie Mays. Barry had, I mean, his lineage is insane. Barry's aunt was an Olympic sprinter in Tokyo in 64. Right. Barry is related to Reggie Jackson, and a couple of others. I mean, the lineage of Bonds is absolutely incredible. And then, of course, his what he learned about the game. He comes up as a little kid. So I talked to his coach at Sarah High School in San Mateo, which is the same school that produced Tom Brady. It's an unbelievable high school. Yeah. It's produced maybe more famous athletes than really any other high school. It's up there with Mater Dei, De La Salle, Sherman Oaks, Notre Dame, whoever you want to talk about. I talked to several of his teammates. Obviously, I knew Charles Scott, so I had a long interview with Charles Scott, who told me all kinds of stories about Barry Bonds. With all due respect, there's a writer named Jeff Pearlman out there who tells an awful lot of Barry Bonds Arizona State stories that he lifted from me. Well, I don't want to say he lifted them from me. I guess I told them to Jeff later. He interviewed me and he gave me credit. So, but of course, now he has a podcast and he's telling these stories like they're his stories. But, you know, I did originally give them to him. And these stories came to me from Charles Scott. And I talked to other people at Arizona State. Unfortunately, his coach, Jim Brock, had passed away. You know, and he played on these. I had personally seen Bonds play a lot in college because he was at Arizona State when I was a student and a JV coach at USC. I went to every single, so I saw him play, well, at least 3 games every year in Dado Field. And I think Terry Marks and I would go over to Jackie Robinson Stadium when Arizona State was playing at UCLA. So I was seeing him play a lot. And he was getting razzed a lot by the USC fans and USC players, you know, for being, they called him bail bonds, you know, because his father had been arrested for DUI several times. And he just, I mean, Barry at Arizona State was incorrigible. And he had missed a curfew and he refused to apologize. And Jim Brock made him run like a marathon. They estimated it was 20 miles that he ran all day long around the field. And Bobby Bonds heard about it. Oh my God. And Bobby Bonds shows up at Tempe. And doesn't call the coach to the side, doesn't go to his office, doesn't go into the clubhouse. No, right in front of the team, Bobby Bonds lays out a scathing indictment on Coach Brock. How could you do this to Barry? You know, US just flaming him, just killing him in front of everybody. You know, it was really bad. So a lot of this stuff is going on, and that, you know, Barry was probably, I don't know, 5th or 6th round, 6th pick in the draft in '85. Should have been the number 1 pick, and had been drafted by the Giants out of high school. Turned them down when they didn't match a lousy little $5,000 more that he wanted. So he already had a reputation. He comes in. So I talked to a lot of his Pirate teammates. When I was a sports agent, we represented Al Martin, who was the guy who took his place in Pittsburgh when Bonds went over to the Giants as a free agent in 1993. And he had given me a lot of insight into Bonds. He knew him personally. He knew Bobby Bonds. And he also told me a lot about what a lot of Pirates teammates said about Barry, because they had been with him for a number of years. And so we did the whole career. He comes to the Giants in 93. They have a fabulous year. He's the MVP. They lose to the Braves by a single game. And then, he's having a Hall of Fame career, but you see these other players, Ken Griffey, Mark McGwire, Sammy Sosa, and they are getting more publicity than Barry. He's playing at Candlestick Park. The team's not all that good. And McGwire and Sosa break the records, and Bonds says, he says this to Hoskins and Anderson, actually, the guys who I knew, who hung around his locker room, his cubicle. Look at all the attention the white boy's getting. I want to get like they're doing. They're on something. I want to get that stuff, and I want to do what they're doing. I want to break those records. I mean, that's becomes his decision. And that's exactly what happened. He goes to Balco. They put him on the clear, and they pump him up. And all you have to do is look at what his body looked like. He, like his dad, Bobby Bonds, was a sleek, looked like a sprinter. Like like I said, his aunt was a sprinter in the Olympics. That's what Barry looked like. He was tall, he had long legs. He was muscular in a sinewy way, and he had the power to hit 45 homers, but that was it. He didn't have as much power even as Willie Mays, his godfather, but he gets on the juice, and it really starts to kick in 99 and 2000. 99, he hits probably 45, 46 homers, 48 homers. Has a big year. Jeff Kent wins MVP. I mean, Bonds has 7 MVP awards. He should have about 10.
Yeah.
2 or 3 years where Terry Pendleton got the MVP and Kent gets the MVP. Kent was an interesting character. I interviewed Jeff Kent. I think I mentioned this with McGowan. And I first I go up to him. I said, "Hey, Jeff, I thought you swung the bat well today." He's gone, "That's a horse crap question." He didn't say crap. And I said, well, first of all, it wasn't a question. And then I tried to change the subject. I'm friends with your college coach, Bob Milano. I was on his staff. And he just looks at me again, like I'm Patrick Swayze in Ghost, looking right through you. Some of these ball players, man, as you know, they can be like that. But and obviously the Giants move into the new ballpark, and they really become a contender and become a great team, and in 2002 they get to the World Series. Bonds has, in 2002, I believe, the best World Series anybody's ever had, but it somehow isn't enough, and they lose to the Angels. But a player of unbelievable talent. And again, lastly, one day he could be really nice. Hey, dude, I'm really sorry. I, had to help my daughter get enrolled in school. And the next day, the 1,000-yard stare. An interesting character.
Yeah. Do me a favor. And if there's any, if I were to take my film direction, producing, editing note, it would be there. A lot of times they'll cut the tape and they'll leave some really good footage that's on the floor. It doesn't make it into the final cut. Are there any early life stories prior to Arizona State, because I want to focus in on that very specifically next. But is there any early life stuff? Because I know high school, you mentioned that he was a football, basketball, baseball, right? He did all three in high school and very good at that. Are there any pieces that are on the floor that didn't make it into the book from that era?
Well, I don't know anything that didn't get into the book, but what was in the book and what is well known about him is that he grew up with Willie Mays, and in many ways was more influenced by Willie Mays than even his dad. Their cubicles were next to each other, and he's there with Willie Mays. He's stealing Willie Mays's gum, and Mays just loves the kid. He's his godfather. Bonds makes Willie Barry's godfather.
Yeah.
An interesting little point, if you look at this picture that is on here, the catcher there is a guy by the name of Chad Kreuter, and he caught for a number of years. And I call Chad Kreuter the Forrest Gump of baseball. I've known Chad since he was 14 years old, and he was very helpful to me with his teammates getting interviews, and I would ask players like Kevin Brown, Mike Piazza about Bonds, what it was like from the opposite side. And he was very helpful. Chad was the Forrest Gump of baseball because he was always in the picture. When Nolan Ryan would throw a no-hitter, Chad would be the catcher. When Nolan Ryan would get his 5,000th career strikeout, Chad was the catcher. When Barry Bonds hits his 73rd home run of 2001, Chad Kreuter is the catcher. I later wrote an article for Substack in which I wrote, I am the Forrest Gump of baseball. I'd replaced Chad Kreuter as the Forrest Gump of baseball. Why do I say that? Well, I played in the minor leagues with Dave Weatherman, who we had on a couple weeks ago at Idaho Falls of the Pioneer League. Our teammate there was Jose Canseco. And I got to know Jose. And later, when I was a coach at Cal, we would play the Oakland A's, and I would talk to Jose. And this is in the absolute prime of his career. And he would put on unbelievable batting practice expositions, and he would do flexing with Dave Henderson. And I would even work out with Jose at a place called Club Sport in San Ramon, which is a very high-end gym in the San Ramon Blackhawk area where John Madden lived and Billy Beane lives and a lot of people live. So that was Jose Canseco. Number two, Mark McGwire. Okay. Oh, I didn't mean the Forrest Gump of baseball. I meant the Forrest Gump of the steroid era. That's what I meant. Chad Kreuter was the Forrest Gump of baseball. I was the Forrest Gump of the steroid era, because then I go to USC, and who's my friend at USC when I'm even coaching the JV baseball? It's Mark McGwire. I knew Mark McGwire very, very, very well. He was a good friend of mine. His roommate was Craig Stevenson, was a good pal of mine to this day, a good ball player. I mean, Mark used to leave me passes at Anaheim, Oakland. And then somehow along the way, he just stopped talking to people. The last time I saw McGwire was in 2001 at Pac Bell Park. He's with the Cardinals. I approach him. Hi, Mark, do you remember me? God, and he rolls his eyes. It's like, what is wrong with this guy? And I start talking about people that we knew at SC, and he literally says, that's just not part of my life anymore. I'm like, man, I just mentioned the guy who was the best man at your wedding. I just mentioned a guy who played Pony League with you in Claremont, Pomona. They're not part of your life. So that was number two. And then Barry Bonds, that's the trifecta of steroids in baseball for sure. That's the steroid era. Canseco, McGwire, Bonds. There are other people, but that's the holy trinity of it. And I knew all of them personally. I wrote about them. I played with them. I went to school with them. Somehow or other, and my son-in-law is always like, how is it you have always just sort of crossed paths with all these people? But I have. So that was an interesting point.
Yeah, I'd throw Sammy in there, but the others that are a part of it, whether you're for, against, neutral, it doesn't matter. You're right; those are the big three. Sammy, of course, you could throw his name in there. He might be on the podium for a lot of people, but
I interviewed him too.
yeah, who do you kick out in order to put Sammy in there? I mean, it's a very interesting group.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about, I was going to mention this in some sort of chronological order, the Arizona State effect. You mentioned that Barry and Reggie Jackson are related. Reggie, of course, is a phenomenal player from Arizona State University. Was there any play in Reggie? Did he kind of make a phone call or two, or did he shed some light on Barry's wanting to be a Sun Devil rather than him playing somewhere else?
Reggie Jackson is one of those guys who got away as far as my writing career. I've tried to get with Reggie. I have been at the stadium when Reggie was there and not been able to get an interview with him. I have reached out to PR guys with the A's and the Yankees, and tried to get with Reggie when I wrote a book about the history of the Oakland A's in 2007. Reggie just got away. So all I really have with Reggie is what he has said. It's on the public record, which is significant. I mean, Reggie Jackson is, you don't even have to interview Reggie. I mean, it's all out there. He's but somebody else wrote it and interviewed him first, or it was probably something he said in a press conference. But he loved Barry. I mean, he admired
him. The mentioning of Jim Brock and the situation there were some teammates at Arizona State that didn't get along very well with Barry. Is that a part of the book as well?
Yeah. I talked to Don Wakamatsu, who was a catcher at Arizona State. Later, I think became the manager of the Seattle Mariners, if my facts are right. I know he had a career. And a pitcher named Doug Henry. I did not talk to Oddibe McDowell. I wasn't able to get a hold of him. Talked to a few. I talked to the, I don't have his name, the announcer. They had a radio guy. Talked to him about Barry, and he didn't say anything bad about Bonds. He just talked about the excitement that Bonds generated at what's the name of that stadium? McHale Stadium, or
in Tempe? Yeah, I believe it is McHale. Yeah, something.
I played there and did some spring training there. But anyway, it was a beautiful ballpark. And, that was really, we talked about college baseball. That's when college baseball was centered on the Pacific, in the Pacific Coast, the Pacific 10 Conference. And A-State, they won the title, did not win a title with Barry. They won the title in 81, and then Barry was there 82, 83, 84. They played some monumental games against the Trojans. And so I talked to all my SC teammates who played against him. Sid Aikens, Craig Stevenson, McGuire. I couldn't get anything out of him, unfortunately. I don't know why. And a few other guys. And some of the coaches, Mike Gillespie. And an interesting point, Barry did not play for the U.S. Olympic team or the U.S. national team, and he played very briefly for the Alaska Gold Panthers. And the reason he played so little on these summer teams, because that's a staple of college baseball, is playing on these summer programs. This is back when the Olympics were being held in 84. This is when he was in school. That was a team that had Will Clark and Palmero and Mark McGuire and Randy Johnson, who I spoke to about Bonds. And Bonds did not hardly participate in any of this because his grades were so bad at Arizona State that he had to take summer school every year to stay eligible. So that was an unfortunate aspect of his career. He could have been an Olympian or played on some of these great summer programs. But yeah, I mean, certainly people who faced him, players from USC and Cal who I talked to, they were in awe of him. His ability was absolutely incredible. He was fast. He had a great arm. He stole lots and lots. When I saw him play, he was more of a base stealer than anything else. He'd get on base and this was, facing Jack Del Rio and Jeff Brown, who were catchers with good arms for the Trojans. They couldn't throw Barry Bonds out. So he was spectacular.
Yeah, I'm looking at a note here. It said he ended up hitting 347, 45 home runs, 175 runs batted in. He had 30 stolen bases in 84. He could do everything, right? He had a strong arm. I mean, who wouldn't want to pick him? For obvious reasons, he goes to Pittsburgh after a dispute coming out of high school, right? You had mentioned that there was between $70,000 $75,000 somewhere. There was a discrepancy. He decides to go to Arizona State, and then he goes to the Pirates. Originally, he was drafted by the Giants, of course, and then that didn't work out. So the Pirates take him. Didn't take him long before he's playing in the majors.
Yeah, well, Willie, there was a small money difference that I think they might have been able to come to an agreement. Willie Mays said, "You go to college." He said, "Go get college experience. You'll get good coaching. You'll get good competition. You'll be scouted. You'll get more money after 3 years, and you'll have the college experience." He says, "I never went to college. And your dad never went to college. Go to college. You're a smart kid. Not necessarily a great academic, but he was a smart kid, smart person."
There's a difference, Stephen, and excuse me for interrupting. There are some times where, I'm not focused. I think he got his degree in criminology. There are times where he's worried about curveballs and he's got to get to practice, and he's not really worried about that criminology degree. So I don't blame it on anything. You can set your mindset on it, but I really didn't think he was there for the academics. Yes, take advantage of the school, play, do the best that you can in that Pac-10, Pac-12 caliber conference from a competition standpoint. And I'm not giving him an excuse. You got to go to class. That's part of the trade out. You get free room and board. You get to play on the baseball team. You got to go to work. But in correlation with that, you better, go to class too, or else you're going to be ineligible. There's somebody else that'll take your spot.
Yeah. So Barry goes into the major leagues. He's playing for Jim Leland. You probably couldn't have picked a better manager to handle Barry, because Jim Leland was not going to take any crap from anybody. And there's a famous video of Leland laying out Barry during spring training in his first or second year.
In front of the entire team.
It was the opposite of the conversation, if you want to call it that Bobby Bonds had with Coach Brock at Arizona State, just, nailing him a new one. And this time it's coming from the other way. Like, this is how we do it in Pittsburgh. And if you don't want to be here, you can go someplace else and I'll trade you and I'll get a good player for you, and so he learns to respect Leland. And, you cannot argue with the results, because Bonds wins a couple of MVP awards in Pittsburgh and leads the Pirates to 3 consecutive division titles.
Yeah.
But as we all know, and as everybody in Atlanta knows, they could not get past those great Braves teams. Barry makes a throw that is just, it's not a bad throw in the 91 or 92 playoffs. The guy from the Braves who had a piano on his back.
Sid Bream, when Sid slid. Yeah, it's
around. I don't know. The throw is only 5 or 6 inches off the plate, which is about as good a throw as you could ask a guy to make from, deep left field, mid left field. But it's not enough. And so that's how we viewed Bonds as his throw doesn't get him, and all the cameras focus on Barry as he's walking off the field. But Off the field, an event takes place, and it's in 1988. I once, I think you guys know that I know Jerry Goff and Jared Goff, and I remember asking Jerry, "Hey, how's Montreal for a city?" And he kind of was a little bit of a sly look, goes, "Oh, it's a great city," And I think what a lot of people are getting at is it probably had the most beautiful women in the National League. And Barry would go to Montreal and he would go to a strip club. They had famed strip clubs. And there was a girl that I don't think she was a stripper. She was a bartender. And Barry falls in love with her. And I later asked Charles Scott about what happened. What was the deal here? And Charles just was like, "Oh man, something happened." He just got fixated on this girl. Why? I don't know. She's from Montreal. It's not his hometown. Charles himself said he'd go with Barry to clubs and women would be lined up for Barry Bonds. He had his pick of women. He was a good-looking guy and obviously had money and fame, but he just gets fixated on this girl. And frankly, and I'm not really telling a story that's not known, everybody in the National League starts talking about it because she has a reputation for having dated many, many National League baseball players, and they're all at the batting cage. Have you heard about Barry? He's going out. I can't remember her name. I don't have it. I don't know if you have her name. Sun, that was her name. I don't know whether it was a strip club name, whether it was Sun. Have you heard about Barry?
Susan. That's
Okay.
the nickname he had for.
Okay.
Yeah.
I did not know that.
I didn't know it was the same.
Yeah.
One.
And this leads to a lot of embarrassment because he marries this girl, and everybody in the league knows who she is and has known her. How else to say it? It gets to the point where it's so public, because I'm not saying anything that anyone doesn't know. It gets to the point, this is when Barry is now in San Francisco, and the fans are all over Barry. And he's in the on-deck circle and say, "Who's your wife sleeping with today?" And Barry is looking at him going, "I thought it was you." He's coming up with these little quips back at him, and so he eventually divorces her. He had an army of lawyers who I guess paid her off. I don't know all the details, or I think whatever details I do have are in the book. A little bit sordid, but he gets past that point, but then he finds another woman. And so by the time I know him, he's happily married. Now, I don't think that marriage lasted. I don't think. When I knew him, he lived in Los Gatos. Now, this is an interesting aside on this. We're fast forwarding to today. Barry lived in the Los Gatos Hills, I think in 2001. Then he lived, I think, in Hillsborough, which is a really nice area, very wealthy area. Some years ago, Barry moved to Marin County, and he moved to Tiburon, where a lot of people live. Robert Redford lives there. Andre Agassi lived there. It's almost like Beverly Hills. A lot of famous people, very wealthy. I work out at a gym in Fairfax, which is probably about 25-minute drive from Tiburon. And Fairfax is right next to a place called White Hill, and it's very famous for bicyclists who go over the hill. And the other side of the hill is Pacific Ocean. So it's just a wonderful place to ride a bike. You go over the hill. It's a great workout. You go all the way to the ocean or the lagoons. This is Bolinas, Point Reyes, that area. Barry Bonds regularly does this. And in all the years that I have been at Fairfax Health Club, I have never seen him, but I know many people who have. and he hangs out at a Good Earth across the street, and he sits there, and he meets up with these fellow bicyclists, and off they go, and they ride their bike, and then they ride back, and then Bonds sits at there's these outside areas where you drink coffee and can have a sandwich and sit in the sun. It's beautiful at the Good Earth, and Barry sits there. And I know many people who know him and have conversed with him at the Good Earth. And from what these people have told me, in particular my friend Ross, they said he's the nicest guy in the world. He has time for them. He talks to them. Some of them have mentioned, yeah, I know a guy named Steve Travers who wrote a book about you. My friend Brad Beadle brought my book. Oh, he was a limo driver. He drives Barry regularly in his limo. Brought my book, had Barry sign it. I have never had any of these Barry sightings, even though I'm so close to it. But it's interesting that some of these guys, they don't tell me these stories about the 1,000-yard stare. This seems to be Barry as a player. And, he was a batting instructor in Miami in 2016, but has not been doing that. If you see Barry, he's regularly at the Pac-Bell Park, or whatever they call it now. I don't even know what their stadium is called now. Maybe it's Pac-Bell again. It's been had many iterations. But Barry's at the, they had the Willie Mays Memorial, or events for Willie McCovey, or the 2002 team is remembered, or what have you. Barry will show up and he'll do interviews, and he's that whole image and that whole way that he conducted himself, that seems to have been part of being a player, seems to be part of the intensity of the competition, and that's gone. And from what I can tell, he's changed drastically as a person. So I have that to offer you.
If you don't mind, I'm going to share a quick story. It's not my encounter with him. I've never met him, but I have a neighbor that called me during baseball season, and he says, "Harper, I need a favor." I said, "Sure, what's up?" I thought he wanted me to mow his lawn, or maybe get the mail for him if he's going to go out of town for a couple days. He says, "I have 4 tickets to the Braves game tomorrow night. I believe it was a Friday." He goes, "I can't go." I go, "Oh, well, what do you need me for?" He goes, "Well, I want to take my son. His name's Alex. And Alex was about the same age as my daughter and my oldest daughter and son. And I can't go. So if you can have the 3 remaining tickets and do whatever you want with them, but would you bring Alex with you?"
Sure.
I said, "Done deal. Absolutely. Yeah."
Asked me twice.
No kidding.
Yeah.
And it turned out the tickets were pretty good. Now, my son couldn't make it. So my eldest daughter, Michaela, and she knew Alex. They were friends.
Yeah.
And we couldn't get a 4th. So we take 3 of the 4 tickets. We drive down to Turner Field. And we sit in row 1 along the left field line, in between the clubhouse, the dugout, and the foul pole, somewhere in the middle of there somewhere, but we're in the very first row. And I can't begin to tell you what we got there. I think we had to stand for the national anthem as we were getting to our seats. So it was right about game time. And then the Braves go out, they get their 3 outs, and then out come the Giants. And in Atlanta, the Giants, the visitors, are on the third base side. And out comes Barry. And he goes from the dugout into left field. And this little boy, Alex, said, yeah, he's 10. And he's screaming at the top of his lungs, "Mr. Bonds, Mr." And he's just trying to get his attention. And it's the cutest thing in the world is he's just, and amongst the other things, steroids, Barry, it was awful.
Little bit
it was just awful, Steven, the stuff that I was hearing, and this little kid who's just trying to get someone to wave or at least acknowledge me. But I know players can't do that anymore. They have to shut it off about a half hour before game time. No autographs, no nothing. It's all business. I get that. But there are little things that can be done that Barry, in my opinion, who was at the height of hatred, that was vitriol spewing that was coming from the fans. No wonder that guy wanted nothing to do with anybody. I was embarrassed for the fans and what they were saying, and I felt for the first time, I go, I would hate to be a player that had to go through what Barry went through every night in every road park that he played in. It was god awful.
You got to put yourself in his position
For just a minute, even if you did. And there's one kid or 12 or 15 that are out there, hey, you're amazing, I love you, thank you, and just get a tip of the hat. Nothing, because there was so much more of the bad stuff that was a part of it.
Yeah. And so you're, like I said, you have to put yourself in the position of Barry. Now, the only problem with that is he had not set himself up with goodwill early on.
Understood.
When all that came out, people were just waiting. They're like a political party that hates the other political party, and then something happens, and as Richard Nixon said, they stuck a sword in me and twisted it with relish, and I probably would have done the same thing to them, to put a different spin on it.
And it just depends who's in power too. I mean, if you've got control in the majority of the House or the Senate or whatever, but Barry did not have the control. He was playing his best baseball, but the writers and the fans and the networks, the media was all against him. And that's why I think it was so easy for him to shut it down. And he was skeptical of everyone, including you, for a while, to where the other reporters were, in a way, Stephen, I'm going to say they were a little jealous of you. Hey, how does he have an in with these guys? But, and I'm not defending him, I'm just saying that was something that I observed, and it made it very easy for me to see a side of the story that not many people talk about. And Barry certainly wasn't going to do it.
Well, that's absolutely true. And that's really one of the reasons that I made note of the fact that the fans were coming around to him after he hit that 500th homer, and I wrote the column that kind of got me into his orbit and eventually made me the author of his book. He did not do himself any favors in 2003 or 4 when he held a notorious press conference in Scottsdale, Arizona, using his son as a prop in the dugout, with his son with a haggard, dog-eared expression, both looking like, really acting like the whole world owed them a living, and blamed it all on racism. And that did not do him any good. Now, just as a quick aside, obviously steroids became the big selling point on the Barry Bonds story. McGwire came out around 2009 or 10 and admitted that he'd done steroids. I think it was before McGwire did the interview with Costas. I wrote letters to McGwire and to Bonds, to however I could reach them. I think through Bonds, I think it was probably through Scott Boras, who I think was his agent. I don't think he still was, but I think that was the best way to try to reach him. I think I reached McGwire through, I think he had a representative in Long Beach or Seal Beach or someplace. Wrote letters, enclosed books to each of them. Hey, you remember me, because they both knew me. I'd like to write your book. I'd like to write the book in which you tell the whole unvarnished story. In both cases, McGwire with how did you do the steroids, and Barry with the same thing. Neither one, I didn't get any response. In fact, with the McGwire letter, I literally had the darn package got sent back to me, like return to sender.
Return to sender. Wow.
Yeah. I don't even think it was opened. Like what? So, I offered my services as a writer to, clear the air, tell the story, because everyone knows you've done it. You really are at this point better off. Honesty is your best policy at this point. What McGuire chose to do was to do the Costas interview, and then he worked his way back in. Bonds worked his way back in a little bit as a batting instructor. You know, they're both around the game. At this point, now with Pete Rose deceased and no longer on the ineligible list, and Joe Jackson is not on. Really, I think you have to really because let's face it, who's not on steroids? You know, how many NFL players in the Hall of Fame did steroids? How many Olympic athletes did steroids? How many Russian and East German athletes did steroids? You know, look at basketball players. Look at the size of these guys compared with the 1980s, you know, and baseball players, you know, how many of them were on steroids? And, you know, probably many in the Hall of Fame, because we don't have all their names. I just don't think you can try to go back and pick out this guy or that guy. So this guy is a good guy. That guy is not a good guy. I think you just have to look at the numbers, call it part of the game. There's been many aspects of baseball history that for various reasons, there was more offense. I mean, Babe Ruth comes along and they say, okay, we're not going to use one baseball in the game. We're going to get rid of the spitter. We're going to, every time the ball is scuffed, we're going to get rid of it, put a shiny new one in there. We're going to put a new cork in the ball. And you see offense in the 1920s. They do it again in 1929-30. Go look at the statistics for baseball, 1930, 31. I think baseball as a game batted 300 in around that year. There was hardly any. Well, there was some good pitching, but not much. You have different periods. And then in the 1960s, you see unbelievable pitching. Why? They elevated the mound in 1962 after Roger Maris hit the home run record in 61. They said, well, the expansion teams are diluting the pitching. So to see to it that the hitters don't just break every record, we're going to raise the mound. Well, this leads to unbelievable pitching in the 60s. Sandy Koufax, Don Drysdale, Juan Marshall, Dean Chance, Denny McClain, 30-game winners, Bob Gibson, 1.12, you know, all these records. They lower the mound after the 68 season because they've gone too far. This is why I have always said, and we'll do this on the show someday, why I've always said Tom Seaver is the greatest pitcher of all time, because Seaver came into the game and had his best year and all of his best years after they lowered the mound. And the lowering of the mound was an enormous help to the hitters. And the pitching was not the same after that. And not only that, I will say this, and you're growing up in LA, I bet you can weigh in on this. In my humble opinion, one of the reasons Sandy Koufax was so great, first of all, the Dodgers were the first team that played almost all night games. Baseball until then and throughout that period, Saturdays and Sundays were day games. Maybe Fridays and Mondays were night games. Usually Wednesdays were day games. In fact, still a lot of teams do it. The Dodgers did not do that. At Dodger Stadium, they wanted to get maximum attendance, and that meant playing at night so that this huge throngs of people who worked could get to Dodger Stadium. So all the games are at night. In addition, it's the smoggiest place in the history of smog. And Dodger Stadium, you can't see the outfield from home plate. I've sat at the Coliseum and said to my daughter, can you see that? You know, did he score? I can't see it through the smog on the other side of the Coliseum. That's how bad it was. And, you know, I don't want to get into global warming and climate change, but it's not like that anymore. It's clean air now. So something's happened to make it better, but that's not the point here. I think the smog, one, made it harder to see the ball when Koufax was throwing it, especially with the smog it erased that sort of green batter's eye that they had. And when they did hit it, it went straight into that smog and didn't carry. Plus, Dodger Stadium was 10 feet. They did not lower or shorten the fences until 1978 with Tom Lasorda, and they had 4 guys who hit 30 homers. They had Garvey, Say, Reggie Smith, and Dusty Baker. They had power all of a sudden, and Lasorda says, "Oh, let's bring the fences in." They brought the fence in. They made less foul territory and less distance between home plate and.
It's 395 now. It was 405 when I was in the early 70s. But let's not even go as far as the smog and the smoke and whatever. You have a lighting issue where if you don't have as many lights, you can't see the ball as well. And I'm sure that I don't think they unplugged all the lights, but when Koufax and Drysdale were on the mound, it was dark.
Yeah, I mean, you could look at now. Maybe it's the photography, but it sure looks darker. So I've always said there's a lot of reasons why you have discrepancies in statistics in sport, and just look at football. I mean, look at the yardage that passers are getting today, and it's all directly related to the rules of the game that change. So things change, and so you can't just hold it against Bonds and McGuire and Sosa and Palmeiro or Clemens for that matter. I mean, I love Randy Johnson. He's close to my heart. I had a conversation with him once that he was just nicest guy. He was so great to me. But I looked at him, I looked at his body, and I was like, he might be on something, And even as McGuire said, and I take him for his word, Bonds, I think, was taking it, as he literally said, so because the white boy is getting all the attention, Willie Mays taught him to be a racist. I mean, I'm sorry. He just did. Everyone who knows that relationship knows that. McGuire was about recovering from injuries, and it started off, and there were no federal rules or state rules saying you can't do steroids. It was not illegal. Everybody in every gym was using it.
Steven, there were no baseball rules at that time.
No. And so he was in a gym all the time. All of his friends weren't his USC friends anymore, as he said when he said that's not part of my life. His friends were his steroid friends at the gym, including his brother, who was a bodybuilder and spilled the beans. But he was about, I'm always injured. I've got plantar fasciitis. I've got problems. And a lot of the injuries can be from steroids or from lifting weights too much weight, especially middle trunk and upper body. But that was the big reason he was taking it. Now, A-Rod has described why he took it, and Palmeiro's, I don't think he's really gone into his reasons. Clemens has held to, no, I never did anything. It's like, come on.
Well, one thing, Steven, that I'll say about all of those players that you've mentioned and their difficulty of getting into the hall, and I'll throw in Pete too, is I don't think there's anything as long, not even an elephant's memory, as the ability to remove a prejudice that the baseball writers of America have and hold and will maintain for as long as they're alive. Am I wrong with that?
No. And it's wrong that they're, because, as the scripture says, forgive me my trespasses as I forgive those who trespass against me. You don't forget, we put people in prison. We'll give them parole, for good behavior. We let them out. Maybe we're saying they don't have good behavior. McGuire, he's admitted what he's done. It doesn't seem to have made any difference whether it's McGuire or Clemens who's not admitted it. But the point is, even with Rose, they say, well, he didn't show contrition. Okay, maybe he didn't show contrition or enough contrition. But as far as I'm concerned, in 1989, I was all for Rose being banned. Okay, yes, he's done wrong. He should be punished. Punishment, okay, that's part of our system. It's a part of our judicial system, and it's part of our sports system.
Yeah.
But does that mean you're punished forever?
Right.
No.
And retribution and being able to
you punish for a certain period of time, and at some point you decide 20 years have passed, 30, 40 years in some of these cases. Joe Jackson let's let him off the hook. I mean, he was a great player. What happened with him, he was just so uneducated and so unaware of the ways of the world. He got swept into this stupid thing that happened. Everybody on that team, outside of maybe Eddie Seacott, who got $10,000 under his pillow, and he was the guy who really threw that series. And the first baseman, he was the organizer. The other guys were just tangential members of it. The one guy who's really a Hall of Famer is Shoeless Joe. Ty Cobb said he was the best hitter he ever saw. Ty Cobb probably threw games. There's all kinds of stories about Ty Cobb throwing games. Hal Chase of the New York Highlanders. We'll talk about old-time baseball one of these days on a book I read called The Glory of Their Times. It was common. Hal Chase of the New York Highlanders constantly threw games. Or if he didn't throw games, he threw an at-bat. He threw a play. You know, just like the gambler in The Natural says, well, you can bet on anybody or anything. You can bet on a called strike. You know, one time I lost it all on a called strike or whatever it is he says, you know. And that was how Hal Chase operated. That book was largely based on Hal Chase. And it got him Eddie Waitkus, who'd been shot by an admiring female fan. He recovered from it. But yeah, the point is, let's forgive. The punishment time should not be eternal. There's only one kind of eternal punishment that's out there, and nobody wants to be part of that.
Yeah, and I think, to avoid the controversy that would be with Pete or with Shoeless Joe, McGuire, Clemens, Sosa, and of course you have to throw Barry Bonds in that, is the decision is being made where there's no really court of appeal for them. They don't get to give their side of the story fully. Before we go, let's wrap a bow on this a little bit. There are some real close things that Barry had. Looking at his stats, lifetime batting average 298. Yeah. He needed about 6 more hits before he's 300. He's got 2,900 and 35 hits. He needs 65 hits to reach 3,000.
Yeah.
The home runs, he ends up with 762. I don't know if he would get 800. He needs another 38. I don't know. Yeah. One's batted in. He's at 1996. He could do some of this stuff in a series, if you know what I mean. It's just one extra series. He's so close to having those magic numbers that anyone would require. But the records, what has he got? 22 different major league records, an impeccable career, and he's also missing a World Series ring. Are those what can you tell me about those little aspects of so close and still considered one of the greatest of all time?
It probably would have been difficult for him to still be around in 2010 when the Giants finally won the World Series. And even had he been on that team, a lot of the reason the Giants won in 2010 was the character of that team, the chemistry of that team. Would Bonds have disrupted that chemistry?
Right.
You don't know. Yeah. He doesn't have the World Series. It's really sad that he's not considered a 300 hitter lifetime. Mickey Mantle missed that by, 1 point and always complained because he said, I'm a 300 hitter. But at the end of his career, he's batting 235. He's got no knees. So that's unfortunate. It's very unfortunate not to be a 3,000 career hit guy. He certainly could have done it with one extra season. And he could have done it had he not been walked so much. Nobody got walked more than him. He got walked more than Ruth or Williams or any of those guys.
Yeah.
800 homers would have been a tough act. Maybe if he could have gone 2 more years. It's hard to say. I think he had another year in him. I think he had something like 22 homers his last year, which is not a bad season in baseball. So more homers than a lot of people get in a season.
Yeah, in their career,
The record is really held by Sadaharu O, who hit something, I don't know how many, something like 840 or 860 playing in Japan. That would have been a tough record to try to get to. All I can tell you is what I saw with my eyes. What you saw when you were looking at him and you're really studying him, that this guy played the game with a flair and a smart. He played it differently from Mays, who was this all-out sort of, leopard on the field, with very fast and his hat flying off. Bonds was he was like Tom Seaver. He was like a offensive version of Tom Seaver, who I always compared to a Wall Street banker in a baseball uniform, going about his business with a steely resolve. And that was Bonds, and his hat wasn't flying off. He wore his uniform perfectly, and there wasn't a waste. Hey, Joe DiMaggio, not a wasted move, but
had the smallest or lightest bat, didn't he? He had a tiny stick that, in spite of the muscles, and you can talk about the steroids. That's the thing that got me, is that he would never have anybody that could throw in the mid to upper 90s that could get a ball past him. And part of the reason was, you know what, I'm going to combat your speed with a lighter bat. How smart is that? I mean, just ingenious to think that, instead of a bigger, heavier 34, 35 ounce McGuire or Canseco bat, he went with a 31.
Yeah, and whether you like to say this or not, the steroids made baseball a better game. It just was a more exciting game, and he played in one of the greatest eras against some of the best competition, some of the best team matchups and pitching batter matchups in the history of the game. He's up against Randy Johnson. He's up against Smoltz, Glavine, Maddox, Clemens, interleague play. They're playing each other. He's facing all these great. One time when we were at his club, at his cubicle, there was the TV was on and Clemens was pitching for the Yankees, and Bonds just was watching that with an eagle eye. And Clemens came up and in on somebody. It might have been the Piazza, I'm not sure. And he said, "You try that at me, I'm going to kick his ass, and then I'll take him deep." And he meant it. He meant it, and he would have. He could do anything on the field. Nothing he couldn't do. Was he better than Willie Mays? Was he better than Hank Aaron, Babe Ruth? I mean, that's such a subjective statement, but he's part of a modern era in which the players were better, and he was the best.
Yeah, the way he articulated a lot of that stuff. There's a YouTube video of him holding a little iPad, and on the other side of the country, there's Greg Maddux holding the same iPad, and they're talking about this one exchange that they have. And Barry at one point goes, "He's probably going to go low and away with me. That's what I'm thinking first time." And then you go to Maddox, and Maddox says, "Yeah, I wanted to start low and away with him." So, Barry had anticipated what it was. And then a changeup comes, and Barry says, "I think he's going to come inside on me again with the second pitch." And then Maddox says, and again, the back and forth between these two, they're not together, but the way that it is edited, you can tell that they're both talking about the same pitch. And Maddox says, "I throw him a slider that you could spit on it." He spits on it. He looks down on it, and it's low and away. So and then Barry says, "If he throws that to me again, I'm going yard with it. You're never going to see that baseball again." And Maddox says, "So I missed with that one. I want to try to go back and get it again." And the next pitch, you see Barry circling second base, and he's kind of waving to people. He hit it, 395 feet into right center field. And Maddox says, "Well, I obviously learned a little bit too late to not do that to that man ever again." Right? It's just part of the thinking, the chess game that goes on between pitcher and batter in every exchange.
Well, that conversation that you just described is the exact same Bonds that I saw studying Clemens on television that day.
Right. Yeah.
He's studying each pitch, and he tries that with me. I'm going to take him deep. He comes in with me. I'm going to kick his ass. He's full of bravado, but a thinking bravado. And he's like, okay, next pitch is going to be a slider. You know, he's looking at Clemens, and he's on television, and he's just playing out the at bat because he knows that someday he's probably going to face Clemens in a World Series game, or when everything's on the line. And I never saw them in a series, but they did face each other. And, you know, these are, I mean, whether it's, Tom Brady against Ray Lewis, or, or Michael Jordan is up against Kobe Bryant, whatever. Kobe was kind of later, but, you get the point.
Well, the World Series thing that they have at the beginning of the year, when Shohei Ohtani and Mike Trout go at one another in the ninth inning of the championship game. I mean, it's just two teammates and two behemoths of the game going at it. Makes for a great watch.
Well, Mays taught him the game. His dad was a smart ball player. I don't think the dad just didn't. Barry did not drink. He learned not to drink by seeing his dad, and that probably helped him a lot. Mays did not drink. So Barry was not a partier, and his life was baseball. And he'd learned every little twitch of the game from Willie, who was unbelievable. I mean, Willie would call the game from center field. He would position everybody on the field. He positioned the shortstop where to play. He'd call out to him and go, "Hey, Lanier, move to the left, Hey, Jimmy Ray, he's going to pull it." I mean, he had everything. He would see every pitch that Marichal and Perry were throwing, and Barry was the same way. By that time, the game had become more analytic, and so there were probably other coaches and people from the press box who kind of took on those jobs. But Barry was every bit as smart and what's the word for it? Instinctive a ball player as Willie Mays was.
Yeah.
Ty Cobb was, Babe Ruth was, Ted Williams, Joe DiMaggio, the great ones, combined with the work ethic and the opportunity and the fact that you're not hurt. And you're not losing 7 years to the Marine Corps or something like that. A lot goes into a career that you say, there's the best. That's the best player ever. There's a very short, and you know this as well as I do, and you know it a lot better than I do. You played at the highest level. I played, a little bit of a level. But you see these players, and you start off in high school, and you see them in college, great athletes. And slowly but surely they fall by the wayside for different reasons. And, then you get to the major leagues, and then you get, the All-Stars. And then finally you've got the Hall of Famers. And then finally you've got the very best Hall of Famers, who are the greatest of all times, as Muhammad Ali would say.
Yep.
The fans, and I've said this before, and this, the fans do not realize what they're watching. The fans just happen to be lucky enough to live in a big city where you can go to Atlanta, or you can go to San Francisco or Dodger Stadium and see the very best athletes in the world, or football players or basketball players. You just go to a high school game and watch them, or go to a college game and watch them, and then make your comparison. Go to the minor leagues and watch them, and you'll see a lot of guys who look like they can get all the way to the top, but they don't quite make it. The ones, Charles Scott is a perfect example. Barry's friend from A-State, as good an athlete as ever came out of his area, Terra Linda High School, the same school that produced Bill Spaceman Lee. And 9 years with the Minnesota Twins and Cleveland Indians, All-American. Bob Milano, I worked for at the University of California. I mentioned Charles Scott. Oh, he's the toughest pitcher we ever faced, he said. That's quite a statement. Bill Bordley, Mike Messina, Jack McDowell. He's saying Charles Scott, toughest pitcher we ever faced. And never made it to the major leagues. 6'5", 230. To this day, a stud. I see him. He coaches travel ball and gives private lessons. You look at him like he looks like like he did when he was playing for the Twins. Didn't make it,
Yeah.
You've seen him. There's a lot of luck, but the best of the best, wow, they are. You need to really realize you're looking at Rembrandt. You're looking at Picasso when you're looking at these guys. You're looking at Brando.
I've told the story before. I believe it was in the Boston All-Star game, and Ted Williams comes out on a cart. He was getting very old and fragile, and they put him in the dugout, and he sits next to Tony Gwynn.
Yeah.
And the two of them sit together and talk and talk and talk. And they're just exchanging with one another, and one says something, and the other listens and nods his head, and then the other one says something. And every player that was on that roster,
and E.F. Hetton talks. Yeah.
every one of them wanted to get a seat next to those two, but they didn't interrupt it. They all wanted to be a fly on the wall, listening to what those two guys were telling. Now, were they talking about the girls at the strip club in Quebec?
No.
Probably not.
No.
They might have been, but they were probably talking about stuff that every one of those guys would have said, wow. And that to me is the best of the best, when they get together and they get a chance to communicate with one another.
That's certainly two of them.
It's a magic moment. So Barry's had several of those. Hopefully everything gets worked out in terms of Hall of Fame status and all that. Before we go, Steven, just a final thought. What was the best reward for you in terms of being able to write the book? And I know Logan will have a shot of that book again, and tell everybody how they can get a copy.
All right, I'll get into that. But two quick notes on Gwynn. I played against him in high school, which was incredible. I didn't really know him, but that was incredible. But the interesting thing, that conversation that Williams had with Gwynn, one of the things he said is, can you smell the smoke off the wood when you barely foul one? And he would ask McGuire, and they would all say, yeah, I did. I don't know whether they really did, but imagine that. That's almost like a guy. It's like Mr. Miyagi using a karate chop to knock 3 beer bottles in half, and the bottles still stay up there.
Yeah.
Swinging the bat and the ball whisks off just the top of the bat, and you smell fire.
Yeah.
But
the friction creates a smell and a sound and a feeling, of course, that you can only tell if you've done it a few times. Obviously, a very special.
Fast you have to swing the bat to get that, you know.
Right.
But okay, so your question for me was my first book. I mean, I will never forget walking into Barnes and Noble in San Rafael, California, and seeing my book there. It was my first book. I had actually written a book before that was about college baseball coaches, and I don't want to get into that. It didn't get published. They kind of screwed me over, the writer's life. But this was my first real book, and it had a real publisher, and there it is sitting there, and I'm doing book signings and people are lining up. It was very thrilling for me, that feeling. As a writer, you put a lot of work into something like that, and it eventually materializes as something tangible. You can put your hands on it, open it, look at it, show it to your friends. I'll never forget my mom and dad. They were so proud, because they'd seen how hard I'd worked and how much I had struggled. I had decided 8 years earlier, I don't want to do these other things. I want to be a writer, and I'm going to sacrifice many things to accomplish that. And I did, and they'd been with me and seen a lot of ups and downs. My daughter had seen a lot of ups and downs. They're all proud of me. And this is what I took out of it, is the pride. My daughter was with me. Oh, okay. Lastly, we did a book signing at a local restaurant, and it just so happened that Charlie Sheen was in the Bay Area, and he came with Denise Richards and made an appearance because he wrote the foreword of the book. And everybody, when I was doing the interviews, hey, hangs out with Charlie Sheen. That must be fun. I did not hang out with Charlie Sheen. He was there, but that was that was a fun little connection. And he was absolutely happy to do it. I've actually asked Charlie to be on this show, reached out to him through whatever social media. I don't know whether he got the email or not. Love to have him on this show. He actually has a new show out. If someone has a way of getting a hold of Charlie, he would be great. But yeah, he wrote the forward. Is that mentioned? Yeah, forward by Charlie Sheen. I think he was calling himself Charles Sheen at that time. I think it was just before he was just before he was going to Two and a Half Men, but he was with Denise Richards, who was Nelly. So that was an interesting little aside. And
Charlie played high school ball at Santa Monica High School. My cousin was in one of his classes.
Samo High.
Samo, yep.
Yeah.
Anyways, all right. So how do we get the book, Steven?
Oh, well, it's still in print, I guess. The best way, really, you can get it for very little, is to just go to Amazon and get it as a used book. You can get it for $2 or $3 plus, a few dollars for shipping. Amazon used book, still out there. And you might I occasionally buy it to restock my bookshelf, because I don't, they give me X number of books when you write them, and then you give them away to people, and I try to stay restocked. So I end up buying my own books, and oftentimes I'll open and there's my autograph, or there's, somebody who I autographed it to, and they've sold it back to Amazon used books at some point. There's one story about that. I'm not going to tell you. There was a famous athlete that I signed a USC book to, and I ended up buying the book back to replenish my stock, and he had sold it. I was like, come on. Are you kidding me? I don't want to tell you who it was, but it was like, come on, man. You got to be kidding me. You sold, what did you get, $10 for this book? So that's the writer's life.
Yes, it is. And appreciate you giving your insight on your writer's life, at least for the portion of the Barry Bonds book that you put together, Baseball Superstar. Tremendous season there that he had in 2001, a tremendous career. Obviously, the numbers and the records, everything about what Barry Bonds did on the field was historic in many respects, but also filled with some controversy. And there are plenty of folks that say he's the greatest player, and others that go, nah, he's not mine. He's not my favorite. So very interesting insight. So we want to say thank you, Steven, for putting that together. I want to thank Logan Landers for being our producer and engineer here today, and for just a chance to talk a little baseball during the off season here with football, and a third of the season into Major League's 2025 year. A lot of great things are going to happen, and we will continue to talk about other baseball stories, baseball topics, and have baseball on our minds here throughout the rest of the summer. So we appreciate everybody being a part of today's show. Thank you again, Steven, for your insight with the book. Have a fantastic day, everybody. We thank you for tuning in to another episode of Take 5 with Steven Travers.